Today I'm hoping that what I can do is to cover some strategies that are available to everyone all the time, but cover the neuroscience behind it. And it's really something that can help both parents or family and caregivers, and as well as our brain injury survivors. So it's am I doing this right? Technology. There we go. So I'm going to offer you an understanding of the science of mindfulness. We're going to identify some perspectives on applying some strategies to self-regulation and more of a mindfulness approach to being able to then participate more appropriately in interactions, maybe even on the edge of things. We're going to talk about co-regulation and what that means, because that's a really important thing in trying to get the most out of a situation. And then increase our understanding of how a mindfulness approach can improve social emotional integration and improve response to difficult situations. So I'm just going to ask for you to be as open as possible, because I know this group is, and maybe to put some things you're already doing through maybe a different lens as we go through. So our vocabulary for today is mindfulness, co-regulation, and resiliency. The first two lead to the latter, and the latter is where we find the ability for optimal recovery. So just a little bit about mindfulness. As a definition, it's just about being present in the moment. We can't change past, can't change future because we don't really know it, but we do have this moment and what's going on in it, and just that art of cultivating attention to the present moment and the details within it can really change how an interaction goes, and also can change our own response to things. So Ellen Langer is somebody who has researched and written a lot on mindfulness, and she had a book in 1989 called Mindfulness. And she basically said you're either mindless or mindful. And if you think about how many times you've driven the car someplace, you got there and you're like, wow, how did I get here? That was a moment of mindlessness, right? But it's really that cultivating that attention to context and the attention to variability. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful is something she researched called the chambermaid study. They had a set of maids, housekeepers in a hotel. A lot of physical work. They were asked to rate their job satisfaction. It was very low. One of the things they complained about was that they had no ability for outside pursuits, they had no physical exercise, their health was bad, and that their work was really hard. And so they really didn't like their jobs at all. They took them through an exercise where they just asked them to change their perspective of their job, to look at the job duties that they had as exercise, to consider it as a way of caring for other people. And in changing their perspective about it, when they came back to study them later, they had actually reduced their BMI and their blood pressure readings by simply changing their perspective. Wow, pretty powerful. So when we look at neuroplasticity, that's, I love that there's a lot more research lately on neuroplasticity. And Sarah Lazar is a neuroscientist at Harvard, and she did a longitudinal study of long-time meditators. She was involved in an accident that caused her to need some physical therapy. And as part of the course of her physical therapy, the PT had recommended yoga. And she started to recognize that there was something else going on. There were some other changes in her, and she wanted to understand it. And as a neuroscientist, she felt like they were actual changes in attention and focus, so she wanted to research it. She did a longitudinal study of meditators, and this is what she found. When they studied the brain, actually went in and looked at and measured gray matter, there was an increase in the gray matter in the insula, sensory regions, and the auditory and sensory cortex of longtime meditators compared to the control group. There was an increased gray matter in the frontal cortex, which is associated with executive function, decision-making, problem-solving, and memory, and working memory. And 50-year-old meditators had brains that looked like 25-year-olds. Pretty amazing, huh?
How long were they doing this for, meditation?
That first study, those meditators had been doing it, they were 50-year-olds who'd been doing it long,
So if I
for a
start
long.
today, it's not really gonna help me.
Well, that's why she did the second
Okay.
study. So she looked at, so how long does it really take to get those changes? And the good news is, after 8 weeks of meditation mindfulness practice, brain volume increased in the posterior cingulate, which is responsible for managing mind wandering, that ability to bring yourself back to the moment, and that self-awareness of, oh, I'm not on task, and bring yourself back. Brain volume increased in the left hippocampus, which is responsible for learning, cognition, memory, emotional regulation. Brain volume increased in the temporal parietal junction, responsible for perspective taking, empathy, and compassion. A big one for our survivors, right?
That's the sensory motor cortex.
That's a sensory motor cortex.
Right.
And increased volume in the pons, where there are physiological regulatory neurotransmitters, that whole thing of being able to calm down an excited system and inhibit it versus, right? And there was a decrease in the amygdala. That's where our fight or flight response is housed. So it actually was increasing all those areas that regulate that, and the amygdala wasn't overactive, so it actually kind of shrunk. And so there wasn't as much fight or flight response. I think we've talked before about left brain, right brain, and so I'm not going to go do a lot of talking here about that, but just to remind you, left brain is our linear, logical brain. And if you get stuck over there in that left brain, and that's what's kind of overriding everything else, you're easy to get stuck in the details, not be able to be very flexible, pretty rigid in your thinking. If that right brain is that more big picture brain, it puts all the details together, and yet if you're stuck over there, it's kind of chaos because it doesn't have anything regulating it to regulate those details and all. So mindfulness is really about building focused attention, and as you see, in practicing it, you can actually change brain structure. So we're going to take a little bit of, and this is one of our favorite quotes. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So I think we're just going to take a real quick break and do a little mindfulness exercise. How many of you are feeling sort of like jittery from the day, or how many of you are feeling kind of low? How many are feeling kind of, whoo, like the day's kind of still with you? Your brain's all over the place and you're there. Okay. How many of you are feeling kind of low regulatory? Gee, I don't know why. Okay, so for you, Ed, you may want to do a little bit more of not long breathing. You want to do a few to settle in, but you may want to speed up and do a little more, right, and feel it here in your diaphragm. The rest of us, I think we're going to kind of sit in the pocket. Okay. So I want you to get where your feet are very firmly planted on the floor. I want you to feel your hips settle into maybe the seat of your chair. Feel the seat support you. And let's close our eyes, rest our hands on our knees. Relax your forehead. Swallow hard and relax your jaw. If it helps you to kind of quiet your brain, you can sort of focus on, like you're looking at that space between your eyes and your nose and see if you see any lights there, anything that helps you focus. And then we're going to take a big, deep breath in through our nose. Follow it and feel it through your diaphragm. If it helps you, you can put your hand on your stomach. Feel yourself stop. Feel that pause, and then exhale through your nose. And then just follow that breath. You might count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale 2, 3, 4. Stay with your breath. And continue that. Try to just stay with your breath. You feel thoughts come in, say thank you, tell them you'll deal with them later, and go back to your breath. I want to take a little body scan and see if you are holding on to some tension someplace. Kind of just check in. But we're not going to judge. If it's there, see if you can breathe into it. Let go of it. Keep following your breath. The exercise will be to keep coming back to your breath if you find yourself wandering off. Right. Start to wiggle your fingers. Be a little bit aware of your feet on the floor. And come back to the room and open your eyes. Did anybody find that hard to do?
Yes.
Yes. It's a practice. That's why they call it a practice. But you can see, and mindfulness can take the shape of meditation like that. It can take the shape of yoga, because in yoga, it's not, and I don't mean power yoga like hot Bikram power yoga. I mean, even just the stretching, because the idea is to then be more aware of your body in space, the muscles, what you can adjust and tweak and get into, so you become very much focused on how you are doing and what's going on in your body. It's that mindfulness practice that's really helpful. So it can be walking. There are meditative walking practices where you're walking and you're just focused on your breath and that sensation of your feet on the ground and attending to what's around you and taking notice and staying right there present in that moment. So those are different forms of mindfulness. All right. So the idea with mindfulness is to kind of get that left and right brain working together and building those structures and those areas that are so important for a few of these other things, which is co-regulation. So co-regulation is, we like to call it the training wheels for independence. Have you ever had that situation where your child starts to scream and then you get all irritated and things start to build up and then your voice raises and then their voice raises and then there's a matching war? Yeah. That's co-regulation in the sort of opposite direction of where we're trying to go. So there is a give and take and a back and forth, and it's just hardwired in us as human beings. So that being more mindful allows you to look at what's going on from them and but being mindful of your own response to it, to help through that. One of the things that it helps to do is to just really observe what you have on your plate. I mean, I know as a parent, it was really easy for me to go, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. But I really wasn't okay. So, you've got a large allostatic load between therapies and what you're trying to navigate and learning things and all of that, and that reduces your reserve for responding to situations. So being mindful of that. It's a really interesting study done by Laura Cirelli at the University of Toronto. They brought in they were actually studying music and music effect on early childhood kiddos. But they brought these 14 months, these infants under 14 months in, and they were going to study the babies and moms using a 4x, kind of quarter time song, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and they put stress response stickers on their feet, and they put stress response stickers on mom. And what the study showed, there was no tactile input, just the music and the eye contact. There was not only the effect that we would expect on infants, they got calmed and relaxed and their stress response went way down, but so did moms. But in direct relationship to the infant's stress response calming. It's just a great show of how everything is interconnected. We're feeding off of each other all the time. And that's really kind of a nice simple way of looking at co-regulation. So, as we build some mindfulness and we are attending to co-regulation and we're using it as a strategy for trying to help them respond in a situation a little bit better, then we are building what we call resiliency, which is the long game. It's what we call the yes brain. So, that the ability to be receptive to asking questions, that not judging themselves or shaming themselves in their own performance, they're able to use empathy and take other people's perspective, and they're able to problem solve. They don't see difficulties as difficulties, they're just situations. They live in Jamaica when they're in the yes brain, no problems, Mom. Just situations to solve. So, and it's engaging the prefrontal cortex more. So, I think I did a presentation before about the flipping your lid and all. Resiliency means that you're less likely to flip the lid, and if you do, you're better able to come back to being regulated. And the no brain, of course, is more reactive in stressful situations. We're stuck in primitive responses, that fight or flight. It tends to be more left brain stuck and more rigid, and there's less integration between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, like we talked about. So they have more time that it takes to recover from poor performance or from stressful situations. That's really important when you start looking at recovery and therapy and those kinds of things, because you want to be able to work at the edge of things and be able to deal with, I didn't do that perfectly, I didn't do that, but I can do that, right? So, So our brains are either in a receptive state or a reactive state, and there's two reactive states. One is hyperarousal, where everything's excitatory, and one is hypoarousal, where they're kind of withdrawing. And you may want to observe where is this other person I'm interacting with at? Are they in that hyperaroused state, or are they more low aroused state? And it may, in the same person, it may go between both, one or the other. But being able to be mindful of that and then respond to that appropriately, and maybe give them some different strategies. So the yes brain increases our brain wiring for learning and better resiliency and working at the edge. It gives us better awareness of the events before the dysregulation or the inability to participate well, and letting us observe, well, what can we change? What is the real cause of this? And being able to get down on their level to figure that out. And then helping promote perspective taking, because that's really where we see a lot of our brain injury survivors have more difficulty, is being able to look at the communication demands in a really dynamic situation and be able to figure out, well, why are you not responding the way I want you to respond? And so this all will help with promoting that perspective taking. So there's a few things that we often talk about in terms of building resiliency. The name it to tame it. So when the lid gets flipped, or they do a lot of withdrawal, being able to sit with them and let whatever neurochemicals are on their brain that have caused that reactive state to sort of wash away. There's a 90-minute rule. They're not going to be able, if their lid's up here and this is where they're at, they're not connected to their prefrontal cortex and able to really integrate. Gotta wait for that moment to pass and then be able to talk about it, name it, so that they can tame whatever it was that either created the fear or created the reaction. But giving that time and space neurochemically to have that happen.
So what do you do during that 90 seconds?
Sometimes it's about reading them. Sometimes it may be a deep hug. Maybe they need deep pressure and hug, and it's okay, I'm here, and we don't have to do anything about it right now. Sometimes it's just not saying anything, but sitting with them, because they just need to know you're not going to abandon them, but you can't deal with it right now, I think that's a matter of sitting and figuring out what they need at that moment. Yeah. Connecting with them. I'm here for you, and I want to hear what you're going to say, but we're going to have to use our words, and getting them back on task. Or, that didn't go well, but it's not the end of the world. We can get back on task. What do you need to do first? And redirecting them back.
Sometimes delineating the behavior of the person as well. I don't like this behavior, but I love you. You are my baby. But this is not okay. And I think, I'm sorry, but sometimes delineating those two really helps as well.
Right. That wasn't the right response, but I love you, and and when you're ready to talk about it, let's figure out what would have been better.
It's like telling my son not to flip people off driving down the road. You cannot do that. That is not okay. He's like, I'm 20. Okay, great, you're 20, but your response right now is not appropriate.
Well, it's hard to give them a thumbs down. When people flip me off while I'm driving, I give them a thumbs down.
That's a good one. Yeah, and it may be that he needs to just have a different, but you may want to ask him, so where's that coming from that you feel that you need to flip them off? It may be more about going to the name it to tame it, because he's doing it in reaction to something that's causing him an excitatory response.
He's very arrogant right now. Old people should never ever be allowed to drive again.
Well, that may be because he's 20.
Well, that's what he's 20, and that's.
He's
the-
turbo 20 right now.
He's turbo 20 with his head injury, right,
Yeah, and
exactly.
he just turned 20 May 17th, but the
Well,
lady
it's my
that,
birthday.
oh, happy birthday. The lady that hit him was 70 going on 71. So it's just like, all
Yeah.
this stuff is stuck, and we're trying to remind him, Wesley, sweetie, you've totaled 3 cars. I mean, he's just been very reckless, and, you know, it's like, even before the wreck, we were trying to get him to understand, you gotta slow your jets, boy, you're
So he probably had a little bit of that risk-taking behavior, mindset before too, so.
very much so.
Mm.
So it's just trying to figure out, you know, like trigger buttons. Like the other day, he was really mad at me because you're acting just like your mother. Because I basically told him, you know, you got to do the program. You're not ready to leave Memphis, which is where he is right now, and he wants to leave. I'm like, okay, do the program. You know, let's do one step at a time. He's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. His brain is healed. I'm like, okay. So frustration, it's battle of wills, and right now they tell me he's like a 6th grader, and I teach 6th graders. And so I'm like, okay, you're my 6th grade boys who's probably special ed as well, and I would never say that to him, but that is how he's acting. And so he's a grown man, and he's 6'2", I'm 5'5".
Yeah,
And so we've got the,
yeah. Well, and his frontal lobes are offline
yes.
right now, yeah. So thinking in terms of he's kind of operating from this primitive response, you might have to say, what does that feel like right now? Like, what are you feeling right now in your body? Where's that coming from? And then ask the questions he's not able to ask himself, but instead of maybe asking him to present. So, are all people over the age of 70 not able to think through things and drive? Or have you ever known somebody who's been more than 70 that's, you know, and just, you may have to take him through the logic but not necessarily give it to him, but take him through it. Yeah. Yeah. Because he needs to do it himself. He needs to find that information himself. Yeah. That engage, not enrage, because sometimes when they're really off, it's really easy to join them because of our co-regulation and to upcharge ourselves. And so you might have to bring yourselves down so that you can engage them and say, wow, you know, that feels really, I'm feeling it in my body. Do you feel it in your body? So maybe we can just sit for a little bit and kind of so that they know that you're engaged with them, but you're not going to continue to hammer them with it. Moving, again, breathing, getting into something where they get focused on something else may be helpful. We talked about the 90-second rule. And then the contingent yes, I find this a really helpful tool. Dan Siegel likes to do a little exercise where he just stands in front of people and he says, no, 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 no. Do you feel, what are you feeling in your body as I do that? I get like tense, I feel it in my skin starts to crawl. And so, and if you think about someone who's not meeting meeting and then they're constantly hearing no, 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 no. So maybe the strategy would be, I want to read, let's take the scenario, I want to read that book again. I'm not going to go to sleep till you read it again. You've read it 5 times. Maybe the answer is, yes, I'll read it again tomorrow after you sleep tonight. That's a contingent, yes.
Lucas always tells me, I'm never gonna sleep again if you make me sleep in my own room. I'm like, you have to, I need some space.
Yes, and you'll have a very tired brain. There's some ways to kind of incorporate some of these mindful practices into just everyday activities for the kids too. Montessori uses like these mazes that they put down on the floor, and they have to might have to carry their puzzle. But the key to this is it's not about carrying the water without dropping it, or carrying the puzzle without dropping it. It's about being mindful, and oops, if the puzzle drops, what are you gonna do now? What do you need to do? Pick up the pieces, let's just start over again. Do you wanna start at the beginning, or do you think it'd be helpful to start where you're at? It's that whole business of trying to build that resiliency. And anything that gets them focused, just like you were doing on the breath, that gets them focused on that task, one after the other, kind of starting to focus that brain. Some other things that help are just visual supports for emotional regulation, like the zones of regulation, where there's a blue zone for I'm feeling kind of like I want to withdraw and I'm not really, and I feel a little low regulatory. Red is I'm feeling really angry and frustrated, and so, and they're way on that side. Green is kind of where we'd like everybody to be, but the thing here is there's no good zone, bad zone. All the zones are equal. It's just, can I recognize it and label it and name it, and then where do I really want to, what would I really like to feel like, so what is it going to take to get there? And then just after you do the zones, you might do some breathing check-in, a body scan, your hand on your belly and your chest, and just breathing and seeing how that may change things for you. And just as a reminder, sometimes in dealing with difficult behavior, we have to look at it as, is it can't versus won't? Because a lot of times with our folks, it's can't. And so asking yourself, is it just being defiant, or is it can't? Because there's a change in the brain function, right? And it's like the chambermaid study. Sometimes when you can make that perspective shift, it puts you back in the moment, allows you to look at what was going on, and how can I change the dynamics of the situation to kind of put it to redirect it in a different direction. We kind of played with, Ed was feeling a little low regulatory, so he did a little different breathing. These are all different breathing techniques. Alerting breathing is what we call elephant breath. You can kind of do balloon breathing, like very big tummy breathing. Calming is where you do the shoulder rolls and back, and then just 5 minutes of breath bubbles, trying to breathe in, notice where you stop, and breathe out, and make inhale and exhale match each other. So you can adjust the breathing style to what's going on. And this is a little page that's on Pinterest, so those exercises are available if you want to have things at home. So overall, we're just trying to increase the window of tolerance for everyone on both sides of the equation, because both sides of the equation are what it's taking to navigate through learning and changing dynamics. And like I said, working at that edge for optimal therapy outcomes. So if your interest is piqued, here are some resources. There's Dr. Dan Siegel is really he's somebody I look to a lot. He is a psychiatrist who has done a lot of research on interpersonal neurobiology, and he has a really much more parent-friendly book called The Yes Brainchild that just came out. He's got another book called The Whole Brainchild, and it's great even for our adolescents and adults. I used it a great deal. I don't know if I shared, but my story is that I have a daughter who's in addiction recovery, and so this has been to finding something that works for us too. And so while these are strategies that work for you guys, it's strategies that work for everybody, really. So, yes, brainchild. And Michelle Garcia Witter is a speech pathologist who has a whole program of, and tons of resources on a website called Social Thinking. And then there are mindfulness-based stress reduction classes online. But there's also things like apps that I use an app called Calm. I think there's some other folks who use Insight. Good to see that you do. They're great for kids too, because they have some great stories and stuff for like bedtime stories that actually make them go to sleep. I've never made it through a bedtime
Wait, what
story.
app is this?
Calm.
I have Calm. I didn't know about the bedtime stories.
Yeah.
I just saw that
Oh
one.
my gosh, I have never made it through one.
It tells me like every 15 minutes before bed, it's like, hey, why don't you do this meditation? I'm like, no, I'm playing cards. But I better, it's right here. I need to start looking out this, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, first goal, just checking in,
Yeah,
right?
it's such a, I think I'm like a little too type A personality for it. I'll get like 2 breaths into it, I'm like, okay, I've got 24 things to do, and this is not one of them, and I cannot get into it.
You know, one of the, because I'm very much that way too. I mean, getting to a 20-minute meditation has been a
20
painful.
minutes?
Yeah, but it's
Wow.
been a painful process, and you know
We used
what?
5 minutes, I almost died, so I can't imagine 20.
And it's really taken getting up first thing in the morning.